Greetings all. After a bit of a pause for a few weeks, our Vijñāna-bhairava-tantra series continues. We have now completed 1/3 of the text. 2/3 to go. Should take a couple years. We're on verse 55 now, and this verse is interesting. It comes kind of out of the blue because it's a verse on how to have lucid dreams. So I'll go through the verse word by word, and there's some controversy about how to interpret this verse, and we'll get into that. So let's recite or read the verse together. Pīnāṃ cha durbalāṃ śaktiṃ dhyātvā dvādaśagocare praviśya hṛdaye dhyāyan svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt. Having meditated on the prāṇa-śakti as thick and gentle in the region of the dvādaśa, and then entering into the heart and meditating there, one attains freedom in one's dreams. Okay, so that's the literal meaning of the verse. But the verse is vague. It's hard to extract the exact practice that we're supposed to do from this verse. So usually when that is the case, we turn to the commentaries, both written and oral, on the text in order to try to discern the meaning as best we can. So I did that, and when I looked at Shivopadhyāya's Sanskrit commentary from about the 17th century, it was not much help, and he was extremely brief and terse in his explanation of this verse, about as terse as he could be, actually. And that's usually a sign that a commentator simply didn't know what exactly was intended by the verse. So he just gives a very simple, brief gloss that doesn't really add much information. Perhaps it's significant that he does clarify that Shakti, energy here in the verse, is actually prāṇa-śakti, life force energy, the life force energy that's linked to the flow of the breath. But that just makes sense in this text because the word Shakti is often used to mean prāṇa-śakti in this text. But we find more help, I think, when we turn to Swami Lakshmanju's oral commentary. His oral commentary delivered sometime in the 70s and recorded and documented by the Universal Shaiva Fellowship and published in a book. It's been published in several different ways, actually. So Swami Lakshmanju, famous as the last living Trika guru in Kashmir, last guru of the Trika lineage in Kashmir, who passed away in 1992, his interpretation makes sense to me. We can't know that it's what the original author had in mind 1,200 years earlier, but it makes sense and it works. So I'll interpret the verse with the help of Lakshmanju's commentary, his oral commentary. So let's look at it word by word, right? We have pīnāṃ, which means thick, cha, and durbalāṃ, gentle or weak or feeble. Lakshmanju interprets this word as meaning slow, which is a bit of a stretch. Perhaps gentle is better because durlabha can mean gentle. So we're told, śaktiṃ dhyātvā, having meditated on the prāṇa-śakti as thick and gentle, where? dvādaśagocare, in the region of the dvādaśa. And here, again, we have a problem of vagueness. What dvādaśa is intended? Because dvādaśa literally means 12 fingers. There's 8, there's 12. 12 fingers width. But that can refer to a number of different regions. So if we go from the bridge of the nose, then 12 fingers is a point on the crown of the head, right in the middle of the crown of the head, the fontanelle, right? That's called the Shakti dvādaśanta in the tantric tradition. You might have heard that term before. So there's one point, and there's another point, the third eye, or rather it's actually a point inside the head behind this, right? And then if we go 12 finger widths down, we have a point at the base of the throat. Now this seems significant, this dvādaśa point, because I was told by a Taoist practitioner in our Facebook group that this is the point that you focus on in some forms of Taoist practice, or in the lineage he received, in order to have lucid dreams. And that's what this verse is about, as we'll see. So that could be significant. And then from the base of the throat, 12 fingers down, is of course the heart, right? The bottom of the sternum is 12 finger widths from the base of the throat. So any of these points, bottom of the sternum, pit of the throat, bridge of the nose or behind it, and crown of the head, any of these points may be used in this practice, Swami Lakshmanju says. I have no reason to doubt him. But the important thing is you pick a point and you stick with it. Don't second guess yourself and switch points. Just stick with the point that you've chosen, because any of these points can work. And it could be the case that working with these different points over a length of time, like working with each one for a couple months, is going to produce different types of lucid dreams. I don't know. I haven't run that experiment yet myself. So let's see what the rest of the verse says. Praviśya hṛdaye, having entered into the heart. Now, this would seem to imply, oh, we should be using that focal point then, except heart, sort of like heart with a capital H, one might say, though there's no capitals in Sanskrit, is sometimes used to mean the central channel. And that's what makes sense to me here. Because if you can go into the dream state while the prana is flowing in the central channel, you will certainly have a lucid dream. So it makes sense that what would be intended here is not this heart, but rather the central channel, the heart of being, the heart of embodied being itself. So having entered the heart, I think it means central channel. And the commentators are vague on this point, as I recall. None of them really clarify that it's definitely the central channel, but that's just what makes sense to me in my reading of these sources. You know, you have to compare the text you're looking at to other similar sources as well, and we find this usage. So dhyāyan, meditating there, meditating in the central channel. So this is an experience of interiorization of awareness. So the suggestion here is that you do this practice of thick and gentle breath, which I'll explain further in a moment. You do this practice while focusing on whichever your focal point is until awareness interiorizes, which you experience as a kind of tranquility and centeredness at the same time as you're becoming drowsy, assuming you're doing this meditation at bedtime, which is the time to do it if you're doing it in order to have lucid dreams. So that's what you're looking for. And as Swami Lakshmanju says, what you want to do is do the practice sitting up, and then when you experience this interiorization of awareness where you feel tranquil and centered and starting to get perhaps a bit drowsy, then you're going to lie down and continue the meditation lying down until you fall asleep. This is Lakshmanju's suggestion, and I can attest it works very well. So I'm endorsing it. So meditating then in the central channel, just on the flow of prana in the central channel, right? The result of which will be svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt. One attains autonomy or freedom, swatantram, in one's dreams. Swapna. Swapna refers to literal dreams, the dreaming state, not like the dreams you have in the sense of goals for your life. That's a modern usage of the term. No, it's the dreams. In dream state, you attain autonomy and freedom in your dreams. Why would that be important on the spiritual path? Because if you have a lucid dream, that's where you know you're dreaming and you have control over the dream, or control over yourself anyway in the dream, not necessarily over what happens to you. Then you can do dream yoga. And dream yoga, quite simply, is doing yoga in your dreams, right? So doing any spiritual practice in the dream state is said to be more powerful than doing that same practice in the waking state in the physical body. And this especially goes for energy body practices, because in the dream state, you're occupying, your consciousness is fully occupying the energy body and not the physical body. So usually they're not separable, but in the dream state, they become separated temporarily, but still linked. So energy body practices, whether tantric or Taoist, are very powerful in the dream state and have a more powerful impact. But any spiritual practice, meditation, even asana, do it in your dreams and see what happens. And if you're like me, you might have to resist temptations. Like when I enter into lucid dreaming, I like to go flying. I like to fly through the air. It's really quite an amazing experience, just to soar high above the land and all that. But if you want to experience these fruits of dream yoga, you need to resist the temptation to do other things, at least sometimes, and do your practice in the dream state. Okay, now let's address the problem of alternate readings for this verse. So what you're going to see if you open any of the published books, you're going to see not svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt, but svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt. That is a more grammatical reading, more grammatically correct, but it's hypermetrical, meaning to say that reading, svapna-svatantram, does not fit in the meter of the verse. And in this period of the tantric corpus, meter usually was more important to the authors than grammar, which probably indicates that these texts were sung, as indeed any verse text can be sung. But we see grammar being sacrificed for meter more often in the original corpus than we see meter being sacrificed for grammar. What do I mean by meter? Well, this is a verse in a specific metrical pattern, which requires 8 syllables times 4 lines, 4 lines of 8 syllables each. So I don't want to get too much into the details of that, but just to say that probably the original read, as I have it here, svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt, because that fits in the meter. But the meaning is the same, so it doesn't actually matter. Now, another variant, though, does matter. In some manuscripts, we see not svapna-svatantram or svatantram āpnuyāt, we see mukta-svatantram āpnuyāt. In some manuscripts, we see mukta instead of swapna. Here's the context, you guys. We were talking about handwritten manuscripts on palm leaf or birch bark or early forms of paper. And different manuscript witnesses, they're called, copies, have different readings. And sometimes it's just a mistake. Somebody made a mistake in writing. But other times we have semantically significant variant readings. That means where the different reading that we see in this manuscript as opposed to that manuscript creates a whole different meaning, a significantly different meaning. And that's what we have here. So some manuscripts read mukta-svatantram āpnuyāt. What does that mean? The liberated one attains freedom. Now, if this was the right reading, if this was the correct original reading, and we can't know for sure, But if it was, it would change the whole meaning of the verse. And the verse is no longer about how to have lucid dreams. It's actually then just about a meditation practice that leads to liberation, a simple meditation practice that leads to liberation. Breath meditation specifically. And again, I'll get to the exact detail of how to do this practice in a moment. But yeah, this breath meditation practice leads you to liberation. But this, I would be surprised if this was the original reading. Why? Because it's a bit banal, it's not really adding a significant new practice in that case, because we already have plenty of breath meditation practices in the text, but also because the language is a bit odd to say mukta-svatantram āpnuyāt. The liberated one attains freedom. It's kind of redundant because by definition, if you're liberated, you're free, so it just doesn't quite work, it doesn't seem likely. And this is something you could only know from many, many years of Sanskrit study to know, oh, that doesn't quite feel right. So I'm going to go with this reading, svapna-svatantram āpnuyāt. And one more piece of support to be clear about this is that we find some manuscripts that read supta-svatantram āpnuyāt. Now, supta means asleep. And so it's an inferior reading to swapna, but it is in the same ballpark as swapna, okay? So that would seem to support this reading. And I'm just sharing a little bit with you of the thought process that Sanskritists go through in trying to figure out, well, which reading are we going to translate? Which reading are we going to decide is most likely the correct reading? So there's actually quite a bit more to it. I'm just giving you the super quick Reader's Digest simplified version. Trust me, this is really the simplified version, right? Because you also have to think about things like orthography, writing. How would this word get corrupted or altered or changed into that word? Is it a likely possibility in the writing style of that manuscript tradition at that time in that region of India? So it gets complicated. But I'll stop geeking out there. But it's nice to kind of let you into the thought process a little bit, that I know most Sanskrit translators don't do that. Okay, so what do we actually do? What's the actual practice? Well, here again, I'm going to turn to Lakshmanju's interpretation, where he's saying thick, meditating on the prāṇa-śakti as thick, pīnāṃ, the first word of the verse, means sounded, means something like the breath has been thickened by sounding it. So what he's referring to there is ujjayi pranayama. And that's simply where you constrict the back of the throat, right where the nasal passages meet the throat. You constrict that point a little bit, and then you get an audible breath sound. So I don't know if you can hear it, but it's like, and there I'm exaggerating it a bit, right? Because it only needs to be loud enough for you to hear it, not for other people in the room to hear it. So this audible breath sound helps you really immerse awareness in the breath, really become focused on the breath. So it is recommended for any form of breath meditation that this is helpful, this ujjayi pranayama. And Swamiji suggests that durbalāṃ should be understood as slow or gentle. So what you're doing here is you're slowing down the breath, extending it, pranayama in the sense of breath extension more than breath control. And you're doing that sounded breath, right? And you're focusing at your focal point, whether it's here, right? Or inside the head behind here, or here, or indeed could be the heart. But since you're really supposed to be focused on the breath, I think it helps to choose a focal point where you can feel the breath, such as behind the bridge of the nose or the pit of the throat. Now, if you've done enough work with sahasrara, this crown of the head point, then you can feel the breath there too. So right now I want you to choose the focal point that you can, where you can feel the energy of the breath, where you can feel the energy of the breath, because this is individual, right? Which one is right for you? Sometimes we don't have that variance. Sometimes, the instructions are very strict. Other times there's this leeway in terms of which you choose. Okay, so having chosen your focal point now, remember, we're not going to do the full practice now, because in the full practice you would do this for up to, let's say, 24 minutes would be a good amount of time, but it doesn't have to even be an exact time. It could be 10, 15, 20, 30, until you're experiencing that interiorization of awareness, that pulling into the central channel, that tranquil centeredness, and then that drowsiness. And then if you're doing the practice for real, then after some time you would lie down, continue the practice, and glide into the sleep state. So right now we're just doing sort of a rehearsal of the practice, a brief rehearsal, right? As is often true in these videos. Okay, so having selected your focal point, then you're going to simply keep your awareness at that focal point while you let the breath thicken and slow, making it audible with ujjayi pranayama, and slowing it down. But keep your awareness or your attention fixed at that focal point. And it's as if you're feeling the breath pass through your focal point, but you're staying still there. And transition into breathing naturally once again. Om. See if there's any questions from those of you watching live. And I just want to mention, I probably shouldn't have used the word breathe naturally as a contrast, because in this practice you are breathing naturally. You're not making a big effort. You're making a gentle effort, but you are slowing down the breath. You're slowing it down, and you're creating that sound. So it is intentional, but it's a gentle effort, you know. That's very important in tantric yoga. Unless otherwise noted, we always use sweet effort, gentle effort. Okay. So if you do this practice when going to sleep, you may see results. It also means that you spend the last, 20, 30 minutes before sleep really turning inward. This is a powerful practice. And it's so important in this day and age for yogis to know that it's really not good for us to be looking at a screen up until the moment we try to go to sleep. And then in the morning, first thing again, to look at your phone last thing before you go to sleep or first thing when you wake up. That is, no judgment around it, but it's certainly un-yogic. We've all done it. I've done it too, but it is not conducive to the practice of yoga. So ideally we want anywhere from 30 to 90 minutes after we wake up and before we go to sleep, screen-free, technology-free. So this is one of several practices you can do at bedtime. Also, just reading a physical book can be a good thing, right? But then ending with this practice. Why don't you give it a try and report on your findings? You can put comments if you're watching this on YouTube or in the Facebook group. Please do experiment, report back in a few weeks on your results. Remember, Tantric Yoga is an experimental laboratory. Nice to be with you all. A couple questions before we end. Brian asks, couldn't meditating on the central channel be stimulating and make it more difficult to fall asleep? Is there a way to avoid or balance this? Well, if you've done the practice correctly with this really slow breath, then probably you're going to be very tranquil and calm. And you're not trying to get into the central channel, as it were. You're just allowing that the prana enters the central channel if it wants to, and that you're in your center. That's what we're talking about here. You know, if somebody's experiencing sort of intense Kundalini syndrome, for lack of a better term, then maybe this is not the practice for them before sleep. Maybe the practice for them is massaging their whole body with Ayurvedic oil before sleep, right? To balance the energy and spread it all over the body, right? So if you find your way with it, you figure out what's right for you, right? Because obviously, if you do this practice and it activates your central channel strongly, then it's not going to work. But it is possible to have this very tranquil central channel experience. Doesn't mean that you'll have it necessarily, right? It depends on the person. By the way, if you do start having lucid dreams, you might want to pick up this book by Namkhai Norbu, Dream Yoga and the Practice of Natural Light. Also, I think Tenzin Wangyal has one as well. And so if you're interested in exploring further, there's some resources out there. There's more resources on the Buddhist Tantra side of things rather than the Shaiva Tantra side, because the teachings on the subject in Tantra Loka have not yet been translated by anyone. Okay, I think that's all the questions. Nice to be with all of you. And we'll be going back to at least one VBT video per week going forward. So there's some more kind of subtle practices to traverse before we get to the bliss practices. So anyway, you can just know that in a few more verses, when we finish eating the main course of this part of the text, then there's some dessert. There's quite a few courses of dessert coming. Okay. Om.